When someone doesn't respond to your message right away? Do you find yourself quietly replaying the conversation in your head? When your partner goes silent, does your body tense as if something fragile might break? When your boss critiques your work in a meeting, does it follow you home, looping in your mind until it starts to feel personal? If any of this sounds familiar, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not weak. You're not overly sensitive. You're human. You've simply learned a pattern that many people carry without realizing it. Most of us grow up believing that our emotional state depends on how others treat us. If someone is distant, we assume we did something wrong. If someone is critical, we take it as proof that we're not good enough. If someone pulls away, we feel rejected. Over time, this way of interpreting the world starts to feel automatic, almost invisible. But it isn't the truth. It's an interpretation. What actually shapes your emotional experience isn't what other people do. It's the meaning your mind assigns to what they do. And that meaning lives entirely inside you. Once you understand that, something important changes. You begin to realize that you have more influence over your inner world than you ever thought. You were just looking in the wrong place. Many people live with a constant background fear. What if I'm not enough? What if I said the wrong thing? What if they don't like me? That fear makes you hyper-aware of tone, silence, facial expressions, and subtle shifts in behavior. Conversations get replayed, moments get analyzed, entire stories get built around someone else's mood, even when that mood has nothing to do with you. This isn't just tiring. It quietly pulls you away from yourself. When your attention is always focused on what other people think, you lose touch with what you think. When your sense of safety depends on approval, you start adjusting yourself to fit what you believe others want. Over time, you don't just feel anxious, you feel disconnected. But this isn't a flaw in you. It's a habit, and habits can change. When you stop taking things personally, life doesn't suddenly become painless. People will still disappoint you. Words can still sting. Silence can still hurt. What changes is something deeper. You stop letting other people define you. You stop turning their behavior into a verdict on your worth. You begin responding with clarity instead of reacting from fear. Emotional control isn't about shutting down or becoming numb. It's about staying present with your feelings while choosing how you respond. It's about understanding that someone else's words reflect their inner world, not your value. And when that distinction becomes clear, manipulation loses its grip. So does chronic self-doubt. This is how real authority forms, not through force or dominance, but through inner steadiness. This is how boundaries become natural, not defensive. And this is how respect begins to show up in your life without you having to demand it. People sense your stability, and they respond to it. If you're here, some part of you already knows that you've been carrying too much of other people's emotional weight. Maybe it's been happening for years. Maybe you don't even remember when it started. You just know you're tired of constantly checking yourself, questioning yourself, and wondering if you're enough. This book isn't about pretending everything is fine, and it isn't about repeating affirmations until you feel better. It's about understanding how this pattern works and learning how to step out of it. You'll learn how your mind turns neutral moments into personal judgments, how that process drains your energy, and how to interrupt it in real time. You don't need to be perfect to start. You just need to be willing to see clearly. In the first chapter, we'll slow this process down and look at it closely. You'll see exactly how taking things personally develops, why it creates emotional dependence, and how it quietly takes your power away. Once you understand the mechanism, You can't unsee it. And once you can see it, you can change it. This isn't about controlling other people. It's about reclaiming authority over yourself, your responses, your peace, and your sense of worth. Chapter 1. What it means to take everything personally. Most people believe their emotional reactions are caused by other people's behavior. If someone is cold, critical, or distant, it feels obvious that the reaction makes sense. But this belief is where the loss of power begins. Because the moment you accept it, your emotional world is no longer yours. Let's slow this down and look at what actually happens. It begins with a moment. Someone says something, or doesn't. They respond differently than you expected. They go quiet. Your mind immediately searches for meaning. What does this mean? Did I do something wrong? What do they think of me? The brain is trying to protect you, so it scans your past experiences and fills in the blanks. Within seconds, a story forms. By the time half a minute has passed, you may already feel anxious, ashamed, or unsettled. Not because anything objectively bad happened, but because of the meaning you assigned to it. That meaning isn't fact. It's interpretation. Imagine your partner doesn't reply to a message right away. The neutral reality could be anything. They're busy, distracted, overwhelmed, or simply away from their phone. But the story your mind creates might sound very different. They're upset. They're pulling away. I said something wrong. Once you accept that story, your body reacts. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts race. You replay past conversations. You feel distress, not because of what happened, but because of what you believe it means. This is what it means to take something personally. It isn't about other people's behavior. It's about turning that behavior into a statement about your worth, your competence, or your value. And once you do that, dependency quietly forms. Their mood starts to determine your peace. Their approval starts to feel necessary. You begin monitoring yourself, adjusting your words, and managing their reactions in an attempt to feel safe. Over time, this becomes exhausting. That isn't peace. It's emotional captivity. What makes this pattern especially powerful is that most people don't realize they're participating in it. They believe their reaction is unavoidable. Of course I feel this way. Look at what happened. But that's a confusion between the event and its meaning. Those are not the same thing. Consider a simple example. A manager says, "This presentation could have been better organized." That's the event. One person hears it and thinks, "That's useful feedback." They make a note and move on. Another person hears the same words and thinks, "I'm incompetent. I don't belong here." The result is shame, anxiety, and hours of rumination. Same words, different meaning, different outcome. The difference isn't strength or intelligence. It's interpretation. When you take things personally, you give other people power over your inner world, often without them ever knowing. While they move on, you stay stuck, replaying the moment and suffering alone. Here's the important part. That suffering isn't inevitable. It isn't caused by the words themselves. It's caused by the story attached to them. This pattern also weakens you over time. You start seeking reassurance because you no longer trust your own perception. You shape yourself around others' expectations. You take responsibility for moods that don't belong to you. Eventually, you're not living your life. You're managing reactions. And no amount of perfection will fix that. You can do everything right and still be criticized. You can give everything and still be misunderstood. If your peace depends on controlling how others see you, it will always be fragile. The shift begins when you recognize this truth. Taking something personally means creating a story, not discovering a fact. Insecurity whispers interpretations that feel true, but feeling true doesn't make them accurate. It turns silence into rejection, feedback into failure, and distance into proof that you're not enough. So how do you interrupt this? It starts with awareness. Notice the moment you make something about yourself. Don't judge it. Just observe it. See the story forming. Then create a pause. Ask yourself simple questions. Is this objectively true? Would I believe this if it came from someone I trust? Is this about me or about what's happening in them? These questions don't invalidate your feelings. They give you space, and in that space, you regain choice. You won't undo this pattern overnight. It's been practiced for years. But every time you interrupt it, something changes. You weaken the old habit and strengthen a new one. You teach your nervous system that you can feel discomfort without losing yourself. That's agency. And agency is where power begins. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback or becoming indifferent. Healthy people listen to input from those they respect. They simply don't turn it into an identity. They evaluate it, learn from it, and decide what to keep. Once you can do that, growth becomes possible. You can take risks without fear defining you. You can hear criticism without hearing a verdict. You can be close to others without losing yourself. You didn't learn to take things personally overnight. You learned it over time, often early, when reading other people's moods really did matter. But you're not there anymore. You don't need to survive by perfect behavior or constant vigilance. You can be yourself. The next chapter explores where this pattern came from and why it formed in the first place. Understanding that origin is what will finally loosen its grip. Chapter 2. How you learned to blame yourself. You weren't born believing that your worth depends on what other people think. You learned that belief. And this matters, because once you understand where it came from, it loses much of its power. When you can see the roots clearly, you can stop letting them quietly run your life. For many people, the habit of taking things personally can be traced back to childhood. That's often where the pattern begins. But childhood looks different for everyone, and people learn this lesson in different ways. Some grow up with a critical parent who withheld affection unless they behaved perfectly. Others learn it from emotional distance, becoming hyper-aware of moods in an effort to avoid abandonment. Some absorb it through siblings, school environments, or early relationships where love became confused with approval. The details vary, but the underlying message is often the same. Your value is conditional. Love has to be earned. Safety depends on being the right kind of person, making the right choices, and not causing discomfort. And along the way, many people also learn something even heavier, that they are responsible for how others feel. If a parent was angry, it must have been your fault. If they were distant, it meant you weren't lovable enough. If they were sad, it became your job to fix it. That's a lot for a child to carry. And when that weight follows you into adulthood, life becomes heavy in ways you may not even notice. It's important to be clear here. This isn't about blaming parents or the past. Most people who passed these lessons on were doing the best they could with what they had. Many were shaped by their own wounds and fears. A critical parent may have grown up under constant judgment. An emotionally unavailable parent may have learned that distance was safer than connection. This isn't about deciding who was wrong. It's about recognizing that what you learned wasn't truth. It was limitation. Each environment teaches its own lesson. In a critical household, the lesson is often that worth is tied to performance. You learn to watch for disapproval. You learn that mistakes are dangerous. Over time, you become highly sensitive to criticism, because in that environment, criticism wasn't just feedback, it was personal. It shaped how you were treated and how safe you felt. In a household where love was conditional, the lesson becomes, belonging must be earned. Affection follows good behavior. Rest comes after proving yourself. Needs are postponed. As an adult, this can show up as constant reassurance seeking, over-explaining, or interpreting any withdrawal of attention as failure. In families where a child had to manage a parent's emotions, a different lesson forms. Other people's feelings are my responsibility. You learn to read moods as a survival skill. You monitor, adjust, and anticipate. You grow into someone who feels guilty when others are upset, who absorbs emotional tension, who struggles to simply be themselves because they're too busy maintaining stability around them. School adds another layer. Worth becomes measurable. You're graded, ranked, compared. You're placed into visible hierarchies. If you struggled academically or socially, or if fitting in required constant effort, you may have learned that acceptance depends on performance, on saying the right things, wearing the right clothes, playing the right role. Then come relationships. The first time someone you cared about pulled away, criticized you, or chose someone else, something settled inside you. This is what rejection feels like. You promised yourself you would never let it happen again. So you began studying people, what they wanted, what pleased them, what kept them close. Slowly, relationships became auditions, and being yourself started to feel risky. By adulthood, this conditioning runs so deep that it no longer feels learned. It feels like reality. Your mind scans constantly for threats to acceptance. Your nervous system reacts to criticism with fear. Emotional patterns formed under conditional belonging become automatic. There's another painful part to this pattern. It reinforces itself. When you're sensitive to criticism, you take things personally. When you take things personally, you withdraw or become defensive. That defensiveness can push people away, and that distance then feels like confirmation that you were right to be afraid. The loop closes, and the belief strengthens. But here's what matters. Learned patterns are not permanent truths. Just because your nervous system adapted this way doesn't mean it has to stay this way. Your brain is capable of learning something new. Your sense of worth can be updated with present-day evidence instead of old stories. The first step is understanding, not blaming, not victimizing yourself, but seeing clearly. You might say, I learned that love was conditional because that's what I experienced. But that was then. This is now. The people in your adult life are not the same people. The rules are different. And you're allowed to rewrite the program. Try naming the message you internalized. For some people, it's, I'm not good enough. For others, I have to earn love. Or I'm responsible for how everyone feels. Or I need permission to exist. When a belief stays unnamed, it runs quietly in the background. When you name it, you can question it. Ask yourself, is this actually true? Look at your current life. Does the evidence support this belief? You may have needed perfection to feel safe once, but do you still? What would really happen if you weren't perfect? Often, reality is far more forgiving than the story your mind tells. Here's a simple practice. Identify one belief about yourself that you believe came from your past. Write it down, then ask, where did I learn this? Who taught me this? Was it true then? Is it true now? What evidence do I have that it no longer applies? The goal isn't to erase the past. It's to stop letting it quietly control your present. These patterns once helped you survive. They made sense in a context where you were dependent and vulnerable. But survival is not the same as thriving. And thriving requires updating old strategies. Sensitivity, vigilance, the need for approval. These were protective mechanisms. They helped you navigate environments that felt uncertain or unsafe. But you don't need them in the same way anymore. You have more choice now than you did then. This is where change begins. When you understand that taking things personally was learned, you create space to learn something new. Once you see the roots clearly, you can decide whether to keep feeding them or let them loosen their grip. And that brings us to the next step. Because understanding where the pattern came from is only half the work. The other half is learning how to respond differently in the present. That's where emotional control comes in. Chapter 3. The difference between strength and reaction. The world tends to misunderstand what strength really looks like. Many people assume strength is dominance, that it's about being louder, more forceful, more intimidating. They equate strength with winning arguments, commanding attention, or never appearing vulnerable. But if you think about the strongest people you've ever met, they probably didn't fit that image. They weren't aggressive or overwhelming. More often, they were calm, grounded, hard to shake. It felt as though they were standing on solid ground while everyone else was reacting around them. Their presence carried weight, not because they demanded it, but because they didn't need to. That isn't coldness. That is power. Real power has very little to do with controlling other people. It has everything to do with controlling your response to what other people do. It's the ability to stay connected to yourself even when someone else is emotional, critical, or unpredictable. It's knowing who you are well enough that another person's mood doesn't destabilize you. This is what emotional control actually means. Many people confuse emotional control with emotional suppression. They think it means shutting down, not caring, or pretending not to feel. But suppression is avoidance. It's pushing emotions away and hoping they don't come back stronger later. Control is something very different. Control is the ability to feel fully and still choose how you respond. When someone you care about says something hurtful, emotional control doesn't mean you don't feel hurt. It means you allow yourself to feel it without immediately acting from it. You don't lash out. You don't shut down. You don't rush to conclusions about what it means. You notice the feeling, give it space, and then decide what to do next. That distinction changes everything. Suppression leads to resentment, emotional buildup, and eventual explosion. Control creates freedom. It creates a pause between stimulus and response, a space where choice becomes possible. And that space is where real power lives. This is also why emotional control makes manipulation ineffective. Manipulation relies on emotional reactivity. Someone says something designed to provoke guilt, fear, or insecurity, and it works only if you react automatically. Your reaction tells them they have access to your emotional state. But when you feel the sting and don't immediately react, when you stay present and steady, the strategy falls apart. The words lose their leverage. This is why people who take things personally are easier to control. Their emotional stability is tied to external approval. Criticism makes them scramble. Withdrawal makes them panic. Disappointment makes them over-explain or comply. The formula works because their nervous system is already primed to react. But when emotional control develops, that dependency dissolves. You can receive criticism without collapsing. You can experience someone else's anger without absorbing it. You can feel fear and still move forward. And once that happens, you're no longer hostage to other people's moods, expectations, or approval. Think about someone you know who embodies this. Someone who stays calm when others panic. Someone who doesn't become defensive when challenged. Someone who can listen to anger without needing to fight or flee. What's your impression of them? They usually seem grounded, trustworthy, clear. People tend to respect them, not because they're intimidating, but because they're steady. Now compare that with someone who takes everything personally. Someone who is easily wounded, constantly seeking reassurance, or adjusting themselves based on perceived approval. Do they feel influential? Or do they seem uncertain, pulled in multiple directions, unsure of who they are because they're too focused on who others want them to be? The difference is emotional control, not suppression, not detachment. Control. So how does this actually develop? The first step is awareness. You begin by noticing what happens inside you when you're triggered. Noticing, not fixing. Where do you feel it in your body? Tightness in the chest, heat in the face, a sudden rush of thoughts. This awareness matters because you can't regulate what you don't recognize. The second step is the pause. This is where everything shifts. Between the trigger and the reaction, there is always a moment of space, even if it feels impossibly small at first. Your job is to widen that space. The simplest way to do that is through your breath. When you're triggered, your nervous system moves into fight or flight. Your breathing becomes shallow and fast. Slow, deliberate breaths reverse that signal. 3 slow exhales can be enough to bring your thinking brain back online. This isn't about calming down perfectly. It's about interrupting the automatic response long enough to regain choice. The third step is intention. Once the pause exists, you can ask yourself different questions. What do I actually want to communicate here? What does this moment require from me? How would the version of me I respect most respond? These questions shift you from reaction into authorship. Let's look at a familiar example. Your partner says, "You never listen to me." Without a pause, you might feel attacked and immediately defend yourself. You list examples. You argue over accuracy. The conversation escalates, and the real issue gets buried. With a pause, something else becomes possible. You feel the sting, notice the defensiveness, and breathe. Then you choose. Maybe you say, "I hear that this feels frustrating for you. Tell me more." Maybe you say, "I want to understand what I'm missing." Or maybe you simply listen. The words are the same. The outcome is completely different. In the first case, their statement controls you. In the second, you control your response. That's power. And when you begin responding this way consistently, people around you change. Not because you're trying to change them, but because your reactions no longer feed unhealthy dynamics. Calm doesn't invite escalation. Non-reactivity doesn't reward manipulation. Steadiness makes games stop working. Over time, people adjust. They respect your boundaries more. They test you less. They take you seriously, not because you demand it, but because you demonstrate emotional stability. This is how authority forms naturally, not through force or dominance, but through self-regulation. People trust those who remain calm under pressure. They listen to those who don't react defensively. They follow those who seem anchored in themselves. The practice for today is simple. Think of one interaction that recently triggered you. Replay it in your mind, but this time imagine inserting the pause. Imagine giving yourself 3 breaths before responding. Imagine choosing your words instead of reacting. Notice how the outcome shifts. That imagined version isn't fantasy. It's a preview of what becomes possible with practice. And this leads us to the next piece: boundaries. Emotional control allows you to choose your response, but boundaries determine what you continue to accept. Control without boundaries leads to endurance. Boundaries without control lead to conflict. Together, they create clarity and self-respect. That's where we're going next. Chapter 4. Boundaries are the fence that keeps you safe. There's something important to understand about people who take things personally. It isn't that they have weak boundaries. In most cases, they never learned how to build boundaries at all. This isn't a criticism. It's an observation. Boundaries aren't something you're born with. They're something you develop. And if no one modeled them for you, if your environment actually rewarded you for ignoring your own limits, then it makes sense that boundaries still feel uncomfortable or even wrong. When you grow up learning that other people's comfort matters more than your own needs, you adapt. You say yes when you mean no. You stay quiet when you need to speak. You tolerate treatment you would never accept from a stranger. Over time, this becomes normal. You stop noticing how much you're giving up because it's all you've ever known. But boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential. They're the difference between a life that feels grounded and a life that feels like constant self-abandonment. Without boundaries, certain patterns tend to repeat. You agree to things you don't want to do. You stay in relationships that drain you. You absorb criticism meant to hurt rather than help. You give your time, energy, and attention to people who don't offer the same in return. You act out of guilt instead of choice. You explain yourself endlessly. You justify your needs. You apologize for taking up space. And eventually, the cost shows up. You feel exhausted, resentful, invisible. You may feel angry at people for taking advantage of you, while also feeling confused about why it keeps happening. The truth is uncomfortable, but freeing. When boundaries aren't set, people don't know where the line is. And when there's no line, they cross it, often without realizing they've done anything wrong. So what is a boundary, really? A boundary isn't a wall. Walls keep everything out. Boundaries are more like doors. A door lets in what belongs and keeps out what doesn't. A boundary quietly says, this is okay with me. This is not. This is where I end and where you begin. It's a line you draw and then respect, without hostility, without explanation, without apology. When boundaries are missing, the message you unintentionally send is, my limits don't matter. And people tend to respond to that message. Not because they're cruel, but because they're human. They follow the rules they're given. When boundaries are present, something shifts. You become someone with standards, someone who knows what they're available for and what they're not. And interestingly, people don't usually respect you less for that. They respect you more. Think about the people you respect most in your own life. They likely have clear boundaries. They say no without lengthy explanations. They don't tolerate behavior that feels wrong to them. They protect their time and energy. They don't feel guilty for having needs. That clarity is part of what makes them feel grounded and trustworthy. Now think about people who struggle with boundaries. They're often overextended, resentful, quietly angry. And despite how much they give, they're rarely treated with real respect. Because respect requires limits. It requires consistency. It requires someone who is willing to stand by what matters to them. So let's get specific. First, boundaries around criticism. Not all criticism is the same. Some feedback is meant to help. Other comments are meant to wound. Learning to tell the difference is essential. Constructive criticism is specific, respectful, and offered with the intention of improvement. Destructive criticism is vague, emotionally charged, and aimed at diminishing you. The boundary here is simple. I listen to feedback from people I trust, and I don't absorb criticism meant to hurt. In practice, this means pausing before taking criticism in. Ask yourself, is this accurate? Is this person someone I respect in this area? Is this about behavior, or is it about my character? If the answer doesn't support growth, you don't need to internalize it. You can acknowledge it politely and move on, without arguing, defending, or explaining. Second, boundaries around time and energy. Your time is finite, your energy is finite. Protecting them isn't selfish, it's responsible. The boundary here is, I don't overcommit, and I'm allowed to be unavailable. This is often where guilt appears. You want to say no, but you worry about disappointing someone or being seen as selfish. So you say yes, even when it costs you. Over time, resentment builds. The solution isn't coldness, it's honesty. I care about you, and I can't do this right now. That's a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone access to all of you. Third, boundaries around how you're treated. Some people speak harshly, some dismiss your feelings, some cross lines repeatedly. The boundary here is, I don't accept disrespectful or unkind behavior. In real life, this might sound simple. I'm not okay with how you're speaking to me. No explanation, no defense, just clarity. If the behavior continues, you remove yourself, not as punishment, but as self-respect. You communicate through action that this treatment isn't acceptable. Fourth, boundaries around emotional labor. You are not responsible for managing other people's emotions. Many people who struggle with boundaries learned early on that their role was to keep others calm, happy, or stable. The boundary here is, I can care without caring. This means listening without fixing, offering compassion without taking responsibility. You might say, I hear that you're upset. That sounds difficult, and I can't solve this for you. That isn't cold. It's clear. It separates empathy from obligation. When you begin setting boundaries, reactions are inevitable. Some people will resist. Some will try to guilt you. Some may accuse you of being selfish. This is often the moment people give up and retreat back into old patterns. But their reaction isn't your responsibility. Discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It often means you're doing something new. You have to be willing to disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You have to tolerate being misunderstood by those who preferred you overextended. The alternative is a life spent negotiating your own needs. And that isn't freedom. Here's a simple practice. Identify one person in your life who regularly crosses your limits. Choose one specific boundary to set. Not vaguely, but clearly. I won't answer work messages after 6 p.m. Or, I'll speak up when I'm talked over. Or, I'll say no when I don't have the capacity. You don't need to do it perfectly. You'll likely feel uncomfortable. They may react poorly. You may question yourself afterward. That's part of the process. Each time you hold a boundary, you teach your nervous system that it's safe to have limits. You also teach others what to expect from you. Over time, something remarkable happens. You take things less personally, not because people stop behaving badly, but because you've clarified what belongs to you and what doesn't. You've created a container around yourself, and what falls outside that container no longer defines you. That's what boundaries do. They don't shut people out. They protect what matters. Chapter 5. How not to take criticism personally. There's a moment that happens again and again in life. Someone says something critical, and in that instant, your sense of stability wobbles. The words echo in your mind. You replay the tone, the timing, the exact phrasing. You build a story around what it means. And before you realize it, you've accepted this person's opinion as fact. And the fact, in your mind, is that something is wrong with you. What's actually happening in that moment is subtle, but powerful. You're confusing someone's perspective with reality. You're treating their opinion as objective truth. And you're doing this even though, on an intellectual level, you already know better. You know that different people can look at the same thing and come to completely different conclusions. You know that criticism is subjective. But knowing that intellectually doesn't always stop the emotional reaction. That's why it's important to slow this down and really understand what criticism is. Criticism is not reality. It's a projection. It's someone else's standards, expectations, fears, and preferences being reflected outward. When someone criticizes your appearance, they're revealing what they value in appearance. When someone criticizes your work, they're revealing their idea of what good work looks like. When someone criticizes your choices, they're revealing their beliefs about how life should be lived. None of this automatically says anything about your worth. It tells you something about the person doing the criticizing. Where things go wrong is when you assume that criticism must be valid simply because it exists. You treat it as evidence. You assume it means something about your intelligence, your competence, or your value as a person. But that's only true if two conditions are met at the same time. First, the person offering the criticism has real credibility in that area. Second, the criticism itself is accurate. If either of those is missing, what you're dealing with isn't feedback, it's opinion, and you are not required to live your life according to other people's opinions. Consider a common example. Your boss, who doesn't fully understand your role, says your presentation was disorganized. Shame hits immediately. You replay the presentation. You decide you're bad at presenting. You feel like you failed. But pause for a moment. Is your boss actually skilled at presentations? Have they done this work themselves? Or are they reacting to a style that differs from their own preferences? Was the presentation objectively disorganized, or simply organized differently than they expected? Those questions matter, because they determine whether the criticism deserves your attention. Or take a more personal example. A parent tells you that you're too ambitious, that you should settle down instead of pushing so hard in your career. Guilt creeps in. You start wondering if you're selfish or unrealistic. But ask yourself, is this person living a life you want to replicate? Do they have expertise in ambition? Or are they projecting their own fears, regrets, or limitations onto you? If it's projection, then the criticism is about them, not about you. This is the filter you need to develop. Not does this hurt? Because hurt is just a feeling. But is this true? Is this person credible? Is this actually useful for my life? These questions separate meaningful feedback from emotional noise. There's also an important distinction between criticism and control. Some criticism genuinely aims to help. Other criticism is an attempt to shape you into something that makes someone else more comfortable. A helpful critic says, "I noticed this, and here's why it might not be working, and here's a possible alternative." It's specific, it's respectful, it leaves room for choice. A controlling critic says, "You're like this, and it's wrong." It's vague, it's judgmental, it demands change. When criticism is really about control, it's usually because your behavior is triggering something unresolved in the other person. You might be doing something they wish they had the courage to do. You might be living in a way that challenges their beliefs. Or your confidence might highlight their insecurity. In those cases, the criticism isn't meant to help you grow. It's meant to make you smaller so they feel safer. Here's a familiar scenario. You decide to start your own business. Your family reacts with criticism. It's too risky, you're not ready. You should choose something more stable. Doubt surfaces immediately. But look closer. Are they speaking from real expertise and concern about your plan? Or are they reacting from fear? Fear of uncertainty, fear of change, fear of seeing you step outside the path they chose? The answer changes how much weight their words deserve. This is why developing a criticism filter is essential. When someone criticizes you, pause before believing it and ask yourself a few questions. First, is this person credible in this area? Do they actually know what they're talking about? Have they demonstrated experience or understanding? If not, you can listen politely and let it pass. Second, is this feedback or judgment? Feedback addresses behavior. Judgment attacks identity. You could prepare more next time is feedback. You're incompetent is judgment. Feedback can be useful. Judgment is noise. Third, is the intention to help or to hurt? Listen to the tone and context. Are they offering insight or are they unloading emotion? Are they trying to solve something or trying to make you feel small? Fourth, is it true? Even well-meaning, credible people can be wrong. Check the facts. Is this actually something you do? Is it really a problem? Fifth, and most important, even if it's true, do I want to change it? Some criticism targets qualities that are central to who you are. You might be ambitious, sensitive, unconventional, or independent. Someone may be right in describing you, but that doesn't mean you're wrong for being that way. You get to decide what belongs to you and what doesn't. Once you start filtering criticism this way, something shifts. You're no longer absorbing every opinion as if it carries equal weight. You stop handing your credibility to people who haven't earned it. You begin to choose what you take in and what you leave behind. Of course, not all criticism should be dismissed. Sometimes people are right. Sometimes there are real areas where you can improve. Emotional maturity is the ability to hear that kind of feedback without collapsing. To say, I can do better, without saying, I am fundamentally flawed. To recognize a mistake without turning it into an identity. This distinction matters deeply, because when feedback no longer threatens who you are, growth becomes possible. You can learn without self-attack. You can improve without shame. You can adjust without abandoning yourself. Here's the practice. Think of a piece of criticism that's been lingering in your mind. Something someone said that stuck. Run it through the filter. Ask each question slowly. Then decide, consciously, whether this criticism deserves your attention. If it does, use it. If it doesn't, let it go fully. Not halfway. Not with doubt. Actually let it go. That's the final step most people miss. It's not just about hearing criticism differently. It's about refusing to carry what was never yours to hold. And when you stop carrying unnecessary criticism, you create space for clarity, for confidence, and for a much quieter mind. Chapter 6. Not taking it personally in relationships. There's a particular way relationships can destabilize you when you tend to take things personally. In a relationship, the other person isn't a stranger. It's someone you care about deeply. Someone whose opinion matters. Someone whose approval can quietly start to feel like survival. And when that person becomes distant, quiet, or angry, it doesn't land as simple feedback. It lands as rejection, as abandonment, as proof that something about you isn't enough. When that happens, an old pattern often takes over. You try to fix it. You search for what you did wrong. You replay conversations, scan for mistakes, adjust yourself. apologize for things you're not sure you even did. You take responsibility for their mood. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to lose yourself in the effort to keep the connection intact. What's important to understand is this: your partner's emotional state is not your responsibility. Their distance is not automatically your fault. Their bad mood is not evidence that you're unlovable. The sooner you can separate their feelings from your worth, the sooner relationships stop being a source of constant anxiety and start becoming what they're meant to be: a place of connection, not self-erasure. This doesn't mean you stop caring about their feelings. It doesn't mean you become indifferent or detached. It means you care while maintaining a boundary between their emotional world and yours. You can be supportive without being responsible. You can be loving without making their feelings a measure of your value. You can be present without assuming that their pain means you're failing. Notice how quickly the mind jumps to conclusions. Your partner is quiet. Immediately, your thoughts race. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? You start probing. You ask what's wrong. They say nothing. You push anyway. You try to fix it. You change your behavior, hoping things will return to normal. Meanwhile, they might simply be tired, or stressed, or processing something unrelated to you. And now they're confused. Not only are they dealing with their own feelings, but they're also being treated as if they've done something wrong. Do you see what happened? They had an internal experience that wasn't about you. You took it personally. You tried to fix something that wasn't broken. And in doing so, you created tension where none needed to exist. Here's another common scenario. Your partner criticizes something you did. Maybe they say you don't help enough around the house, or you're not affectionate enough, or you spend too much time with friends. And immediately, you hear a verdict. I'm failing. I'm not good enough. I don't love them the right way. From there, you either defend yourself intensely or collapse into self-blame and try to change everything about who you are. But there's another way to hear this. You can listen without turning it into a judgment about your worth. You can separate the content of what they're saying from the meaning you assign to it. Sometimes your partner will have a valid point. You might be distracted. You might need to show up differently. Hearing that doesn't make you a bad partner. It makes you someone who can listen and decide how to respond. The key word is decide. You're allowed to take feedback in without surrendering yourself. You're allowed to consider change without feeling obligated to become someone else. This is where a crucial boundary comes in. I care about your feelings, and I'm not responsible for them. I can listen without fixing. I can adjust without erasing myself. I can love you and still be who I am. Many people who take things personally in relationships fall into a deeply self-destructive pattern. They try to become who their partner wants them to be. They suppress parts of themselves. They give up hobbies, friendships, and dreams to avoid conflict or jealousy. They tell themselves this is love, but it isn't. It's self-abandonment disguised as devotion, and it never leads to real closeness. The more you abandon yourself, the less of you there is to connect with. Over time, resentment grows. Anxiety increases. You feel smaller and less secure, not more. Healthy love works differently. Healthy love says, I want you to be yourself. It welcomes your independence, your interests, your growth. It doesn't require you to shrink to keep the peace. And when insecurity or jealousy arises, it's recognized as something to work through, not something to control the other person with. When you stop taking your partner's emotions personally, relationships often become calmer and more secure. You stop trying to manage their inner world You stop striving to be perfect so they won't leave. You stop monitoring every shift in mood. And paradoxically, this often makes the relationship stronger. People tend to feel safer with someone who isn't anxiously trying to control the bond. Here's a simple example. A partner comes home quiet. In the past, this might have triggered panic and fixing. Now, instead, you notice the quiet. You ask gently if they want to talk. They say not right now. You respond, "Okay, I'm here if you do," and you continue with your evening. You don't interpret their silence as rejection. You don't make it about you. And often, after some time, they open up naturally. The connection deepens because there was space instead of pressure. This is what happens when you stop taking things personally. You create emotional safety for both of you. You allow room for moods, struggles, and quiet moments without turning them into threats. But there's a more difficult situation that needs to be addressed. What if the distance, criticism, or withdrawal isn't occasional, but consistent? What if it's a pattern? Some people use emotional withdrawal as a form of control. They go silent until you apologize. They criticize constantly. They compare you to others. They keep you uncertain about where you stand. This isn't someone having a bad day. This is a dynamic that erodes your sense of self. In those cases, a firmer boundary is needed. The boundary becomes, I'm not going to participate in this dynamic. I'm not going to chase silence. I'm not going to accept constant criticism. I'm not going to compete with imaginary standards. And if this continues, I will have to question whether this relationship is healthy for me. That boundary can be frightening because it may risk the relationship. But a relationship that requires you to disappear, to doubt your worth, or to constantly manage someone else's emotions isn't a relationship. It's slow erosion, and you deserve more than that. Here's the practice for today. Think about your current or most recent relationship. Identify one way you take your partner's feelings personally. Maybe you interpret distance as rejection. Maybe you absorb criticism as truth. Maybe you feel responsible for fixing their bad moods. Name it. Then ask yourself, is this actually about me? Is their distance truly rejection? Is their criticism objectively accurate? Is their mood really yours to fix? Often, the answer is no. And if it's not yours, you don't have to carry it. The final piece is this. If separating your partner's feelings from your worth feels impossible, support can help. A therapist can help you understand where this pattern came from and how to shift it. Because no amount of reassurance from another person will ever be enough if you don't believe in your own worth. And the constant trying will exhaust both of you. When love no longer means fixing someone else's emotions, it becomes something far more stable. It becomes a place where two whole people can meet without losing themselves. Chapter 7. Why professional boundaries are not selfish. There's a particular kind of suffering that shows up at work when you take things personally. Work is where your performance is visible, measured, and constantly evaluated. It's where someone else has authority over your paycheck, your opportunities, and sometimes your sense of security. It's where competition exists, whether it's acknowledged or not. And when the stakes feel high, taking things personally can start to feel almost automatic. Your boss gives you feedback, and you hear, "I'm incompetent." A client turns down your proposal, and you hear, "I'm not good enough." A coworker gets promoted, and you hear, "I've failed." A meeting goes poorly, and you hear, "Everyone thinks I'm stupid." By the end of the day, you've collected these interpretations and woven them into a story, not just about your job, but about who you are and what your future looks like. And that story leaves you anxious discouraged, and already questioning your place. But here's what's actually true. Professional feedback is about your work, not your worth. A client saying no is about their needs or priorities, not your value as a person. Someone else getting promoted is about timing, politics, or fit, not proof that you're incapable. A meeting going badly is about that meeting, not your intelligence. The problem is that work feels personal. Your livelihood depends on it. Your identity gets wrapped around what you do. You may spend more time with colleagues than with people you love. So it makes sense that it feels personal. But professional evaluation doesn't have to be internalized to be useful. In fact, the people who do best over time are usually the ones who can separate the two. Think about people you admire professionally, not just for their income, but for their competence and steadiness. They tend to share a quality that looks almost effortless. They aren't easily rattled by criticism. They hear rejection and keep moving. They fail without collapsing. Their secret isn't arrogance or indifference. It's separation. They've learned to separate their work from their identity. Here's how that separation works in practice. Your boss says, "This report isn't what I was looking for." Without separation, you hear, "I'm not what they're looking for." Shame follows. Self-doubt takes over. But with separation, you hear, "This report needs changes." That's information. That's solvable. That's not a verdict on you. The words are the same. The interpretation is different. And that interpretation determines whether you grow or spiral. Now, it's important to be honest about something else. Not all criticism at work is clean or professional. Some bosses, co-workers, or clients use work as a channel for their own frustration, insecurity, or need for control. A boss who snaps at everyone might simply be overwhelmed. A co-worker who consistently undermines you may be threatened. A client who belittles you might be projecting stress. This distinction matters because it changes how you respond. If feedback is genuinely about your work, you listen and improve. If it's actually about them, you protect yourself and don't absorb it. Consider this situation. You propose an idea in a meeting. A coworker responds, "That won't work. It's a waste of time." Embarrassment hits instantly. You feel shut down. But pause. Is this comment evidence that your idea is bad? Or is it evidence of a dismissive communication style? Is it a thoughtful critique or a power move? If your idea has flaws, that's useful information. But if the response is dismissive rather than constructive, you don't need to internalize it. You simply note how this person communicates and adjust your expectations. You don't confuse their tone with truth. This is where boundaries become essential at work, especially because power dynamics are real. Your boss has authority. Your peers may be competing with you. Clients are evaluating outcomes. In that environment, boundaries protect your clarity. One boundary is around feedback. I listen to feedback about my work from qualified people. I don't accept personal attacks disguised as feedback. Your presentation was disorganized is feedback. You're disorganized is a character judgment. One is useful, the other isn't. Another boundary is around effort. I do good work without destroying myself to prove my value. Some workplaces normalize constant availability and burnout. The boundary is simple. I work responsibly, and I protect my rest. I am a professional, not a machine. Another boundary is around identity. My job is not my identity. You have a role. You are not the role. You earn money. You are not the paycheck. When this distinction is clear, work stops feeling like a referendum on your worth. It becomes a place where you apply skills, learn, and contribute. When you hold these boundaries, something shifts. You take more risks because perfection is no longer required for safety. You recover faster from setbacks because disappointment doesn't turn into self-attack. You communicate more clearly because you're not constantly defending your ego. And people notice. Not because you're louder, but because you're steadier. Confidence rooted in self-respect is quietly magnetic. Now let's talk about money. Because money is another place where people take things deeply personally. If you've struggled financially, grown up with scarcity, or experienced failure around money, it's easy to link income to worth. A failed business becomes proof you're incapable. Earning less than friends becomes proof you're behind. Not getting a raise becomes proof you're undervalued as a person. But money isn't a verdict. It's an exchange. You provide value, and you're compensated. If you're not earning what you want, that isn't a statement about your worth. It's information about skills, negotiation, market demand, or timing. All of those are variables, not identities. The boundary around money is this: I know my value, and I ask for what I'm worth. I don't accept less out of fear. I don't accept less because I feel grateful to be here. I don't accept less because I doubt myself. I assess my value realistically and advocate for it calmly. And if you don't yet know your value, that's not a flaw. It's a task. Research your market. Talk to people in your field. Build skills. Gather evidence of your contribution. Then ask, clearly and factually. Not emotionally. Not apologetically. Simply, based on my experience, contributions, and market standards, this is what I'm seeking. Here's the practice. Think of one professional situation that's been weighing on you. A piece of feedback, a missed opportunity, a financial disappointment. Now separate fact from interpretation. What actually happened? What conclusions did you add? What would you say to a friend in the same position? You'd likely be kinder, more realistic, more grounded. So offer yourself the same clarity. Separate your work from your worth. Separate money from identity. And watch how your relationship with work and with yourself begins to change. Chapter 8. You'll slip back, and that's okay. Here's what's likely to happen. You're going to read this book or listen to it, and something will click. You'll feel a rush of clarity. For the first time, you'll truly see that you don't have to live at the mercy of other people's moods. That you can slow down your reactions. That other people's opinions don't have to define your life. You'll feel lighter, more capable, maybe even free. And you'll think, okay, I've got this. I'm done taking things personally. And then something will happen. Someone will say something sharp. Or they won't say anything at all. Someone will withdraw. Someone will criticize you. Someone will disappoint you. And in that moment, the clarity can vanish like it was never there. Your chest tightens. Your mind races. The old story wakes up. You spiral into familiar conclusions you've been rehearsing for years. And you'll think, I failed. I'm back at the beginning. None of this is working. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that you're learning. This is the moment most people misunderstand, and it's where many people quit. They have one slip, one familiar reaction, one day where they spiral, and they decide change isn't real. They go back to the old way because at least the old way is familiar. But this is actually where the work becomes real. This is where you move from intellectual insight to embodied change, where your nervous system starts learning what your mind already understands. Let's talk about triggers, because they're not random. A trigger is a cue, a word, a tone, a silence, a look that activates your nervous system. It makes your body react as if you're back in an old, painful moment. Your boss raises their voice, and suddenly you're 5 years old again, listening to anger you couldn't stop. Your partner goes quiet, and suddenly you're a teenager being left. A friend doesn't respond, and suddenly you're back in school, feeling invisible. Your nervous system doesn't carefully analyze the timeline. It doesn't ask, is this 2025 or 2005? It simply recognizes a pattern that once meant danger, and it reacts the way it learned to react. That reaction often made sense back then. It helped you stay alert, stay compliant, stay safe, stay connected. But now it's often too much. Now it creates problems instead of solving them. The triggers that hit hardest usually touch your deepest fear. If your deepest fear is rejection, withdrawal will feel like a threat. If your deepest fear is inadequacy, criticism will feel like collapse. If your deepest fear is abandonment, distance will feel unbearable. The trigger isn't random. It's pressing exactly where you're most vulnerable. And here's an important truth. Triggers don't disappear just because you understand them. Understanding is step one, but the wiring is still there. The conditioning still exists. You can't always think your way out of a nervous system response. You have to retrain the system by practicing a new response enough times that your body starts to believe you're safe. So when you slip, when you get triggered and fall back into the old pattern, that isn't failure. It's practice. It's the moment you get to do the work that actually changes you. But there's one challenge. Triggers are often automatic. One moment you're fine, the next moment you're inside a story. You're not calmly observing your thoughts, you're living them. That's why the first skill is awareness. When you notice the spiral, tight chest, racing mind, catastrophic conclusions, pause. Even if you don't do anything else perfectly, try this. Pause long enough to ask, what triggered me right now? What word, tone, behavior, or silence activated this? Often, naming the trigger already reduces its power, because now you're not the story. You're the one noticing the story. You shift from, they hate me, to, I'm triggered by silence because it resembles an abandonment pattern. That difference is enormous. One keeps you trapped, the other gives you options. Now let's make it practical. Here's a simple protocol for moments like this. Not because you need to become a robot, but because you need something reliable when your mind is loud. Step 1. Notice. Name what's happening. I'm activated. I'm in a story. My body is reacting. No judgment, no shame, just recognition. Step 2. Breathe. Yes, it's simple. That's the point. When you're triggered, your breathing becomes shallow and fast. Your nervous system moves into fight or flight, so you reverse it. Deep inhale through the nose. Slow exhale through the mouth. Do it 3 times. Not to fix yourself, but to bring your thinking brain back online. Step 3. Question the story. Ask, is this true? Not does it feel true, because triggers always feel true, but is it actually true? Do I know they're rejecting me? Do I know I failed? Do I know I'm about to be abandoned? Usually the honest answer is no. It's fear predicting the future based on old data. Step 4. Return to now. Triggers pull you into the past. They make you react as if the old wound is happening again. So come back to the present. Look around. What is actually happening right now? What do you know for sure? What are you assuming? The present moment is often far safer than the story. Now, sometimes you won't handle it cleanly. You might snap, you might shut down, you might get defensive, you might cry or react intensely. That doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're human. The goal isn't perfection, the goal is repair. When you've calmed down, you can take responsibility in a healthy way, without shame. You can say, I got triggered earlier and I didn't handle it well. I'm sorry. Then you explain without excuses. When you went quiet, it activated an old fear for me. That's mine to work on. I'm sorry I reacted the way I did. This kind of honesty can actually strengthen relationships. It gives context. It turns confusion into understanding. It lets the other person know you're not attacking them. You're working with your own wiring. Of course, some triggers are bigger than others. Some hit so hard that in the moment you can't access logic at all. If that's you, support can help. A therapist can help you trace the trigger to its origin and retrain the response. That isn't weakness. It's skill building. Some people also benefit from trauma-informed approaches like EMDR or somatic therapies, which are designed to help the nervous system process old wounds so they stop hijacking the present. If your reactions feel bigger than the situation, if you keep repeating the same spirals, if you surprise yourself with how intense it gets, you're not broken. You may simply need a deeper level of support. And even with support, you'll still get triggered sometimes. Even highly self-aware people do. Because nervous systems don't change overnight. Because being human includes old wiring. So what do you do when you relapse? When you take something personally the way you used to? First, forgive yourself immediately. Not later, immediately. The moment you notice it, say, I got triggered, I slipped. That's okay. I'm learning. Shame is not discipline. Shame is just the old pattern wearing a different outfit. Second, get curious instead of critical. Ask, what was I afraid of? What belief got activated? What did this moment resemble from my past? Curiosity teaches. Criticism just tightens the knot. Third, return to the protocol. Notice, breathe, question the story. Return to now. Even if you do it imperfectly. Fourth, adjust. Maybe you need more rest. Maybe you need to limit certain conversations while you're building new habits. Maybe you need clearer boundaries. Maybe you need support. Whatever it is, you're allowed to take it seriously. Here's the truth that makes this sustainable. Transformation isn't linear. You don't go from taking everything personally to taking nothing personally. It usually looks like this. You take things personally less often. When you do, you notice faster. When you notice, you recover faster. The spirals shorten. The emotional hangovers lighten. You return to yourself more quickly. And slowly, through repetition, the pattern changes. Not because you were perfect, but because you kept practicing the new response until it became the natural one. The practice for today is simple. Identify your number one trigger, the situation, the tone, the behavior that hits the hardest. Once you know it, you can prepare for it. You can rehearse your protocol. You can visualize how you want to respond. You can build support around the exact thing that usually knocks you off center. Because knowing your triggers isn't weakness. It's sophistication. It's self-awareness at a high level. The triggers you can name, you can work with. The triggers you can't name will keep working you. And here's the final thing to remember. Some things may always be activating. Some people may always press old buttons. That's okay. You're not trying to become someone who never gets triggered. You're becoming someone who gets triggered and responds with grace. Someone who understands what's happening. Someone who can feel fear and still choose their next move. That person already exists inside you. You're just building the skills to let them lead more often. Conclusion. Where the real work begins. You've reached the end of this book. But in many ways, this is where the beginning actually starts. Reading about emotional control is one thing. Living it is another. And the space between understanding something intellectually and embodying it in real life is where most people get stuck. That's why what comes next matters. Not someday. Not when you feel more prepared. But starting now. Everything you've explored in these chapters points to a single truth. You have more power than you thought. Not power over other people. Power over yourself. Power over how you interpret what happens to you. Power over how you respond instead of react. And that power has always been available to you. You don't need to earn it, deserve it, or get permission to use it. It's already yours. You've just been disconnected from it. Think back through what you've learned. In the first chapter, you saw how taking things personally works. How a neutral event becomes a story about your worth. How easily power is handed away when other people's behavior is treated as evidence about who you are. And you learned that you can interrupt that process. You can choose clarity instead of insecurity. In the second chapter, you understood where the pattern came from. You didn't invent the belief that your worth was conditional. You learned it at a time when you were trying to survive. Those lessons made sense then. They don't define you now. And realizing that opens the door to real change, because what was learned can be unlearned. In the third chapter, you discovered that emotional control isn't coldness. It's mastery. It's the ability to feel fully without being ruled by those feelings. And when you have that, manipulation loses its grip. You stop reacting and start choosing. In the fourth chapter, you learned that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. They protect your time, your energy, your peace. And when your boundaries are clear, fewer things feel personal, because you already know what you will and won't accept. In the fifth chapter, you learned to filter criticism instead of absorbing it automatically. You learned to separate opinion from truth, feedback from judgment, information from noise. In the sixth chapter, you brought this work into relationships. You learned that you can love deeply without being responsible for another person's emotional state. You can be present without abandoning yourself. And when you stop trying to control whether someone stays, connection often becomes more secure. In the seventh chapter, you applied this to work and money. You learned to separate performance from worth, income from identity. And when that separation is clear, your career becomes steadier, more resilient, and more intentional. In the eighth chapter, you learned something essential. Slipping back isn't failure. It's part of the process. Triggers will happen. Old patterns will resurface. What matters is how quickly you notice, how gently you recover, and how often you return to the path you're choosing. So what comes next? Here's what I want you to do. Pick one thing from this book. Just one, not all 8 chapters. One practice, one shift. Maybe it's setting a boundary. Maybe it's pausing when you're triggered. Maybe it's running criticism through the filter. Maybe it's no longer taking your partner's mood as a verdict on your worth. Choose one and commit to practicing it for the next 2 weeks. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, just with intention. This is how real change happens, not through dramatic transformation or constant self-improvement, but through small, repeated choices, through moments where you pause instead of react, through moments where you question the story instead of believing it, through moments where you remember that you have a choice. Each of those moments is rewiring your brain. Each one is strengthening a new pathway. Each one is evidence to yourself that you can live differently. And something subtle will happen. After a couple of weeks, you'll feel slightly different, a little steadier, a little more grounded, a little more like yourself. That shift creates momentum. That's when you add the next practice, and then another. Over time, this becomes who you are, not someone who never gets triggered, not someone who never takes things personally, but someone who does it less often, notices it sooner, and recovers faster. Someone who stays centered. Someone whose sense of worth doesn't rise and fall with other people's opinions. That's the person you're building, one choice at a time. It also matters to say this: you don't have to do this alone. If you feel stuck, if reactions feel overwhelming, if the triggers run deeper than you can manage by yourself, support is not weakness. It's wisdom. Therapy, community, accountability. These are tools, not failures. Be gentle with yourself as you do this work. You've been running the same patterns for a long time. Your nervous system learned them for a reason. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. And the fact that you've stayed with this book until the end means something in you already knows that. Hold on to that knowing. Let it guide you when things feel hard. Let it remind you to pause instead of react, to choose yourself instead of disappearing to keep others comfortable. The power you've been searching for isn't something you need to find. It's something you need to reclaim. You already have it. The moment you stop giving it away, everything starts to change. Your relationships change because you're no longer seeking approval. You're offering connection from wholeness. Your work changes because you're no longer ruled by fear of criticism. You're learning instead of defending. Your sense of self changes because it's no longer built on validation. It's built from within. And your life changes because you stop living to manage other people's perceptions. You start living as yourself. That's the freedom on the other side of this work. Not freedom from opinions, those will always exist. But freedom from needing them to feel okay. Freedom from needing approval to feel worthy. Freedom from the exhaustion of trying to be what everyone else needs. You are worthy right now. Not because of what you achieve, not because of how well you perform, not because of what anyone thinks, but because you exist, because you're human, because you're here. And when that truth stops being just an idea and starts being something you feel, something your body believes, everything shifts. So start with one thing. Today. And tomorrow, do it again. And the day after that, do it again. After enough of those days, you'll look back and realize you didn't become someone new. You simply stopped abandoning yourself to be accepted. You stopped giving your power away. You came home to yourself. That person you're becoming isn't a future version. It's the real one. The one that existed before all the stories, all the conditioning, all the ways you learned to shrink so others could feel comfortable. So let's begin now. What's one thing you'll do differently today? What's one boundary you'll honor? What's one story you'll question? What's one moment where you'll choose yourself? Do that. Then do it again. Because lives aren't changed by single breakthroughs. They're changed by consistency, by showing up for yourself again and again until you become someone you trust. And that trust, that quiet, grounded trust in yourself, is where real power lives. It's where real peace lives. It's where real freedom lives.